just a really easy introduction to GNS3, installing it, some of the different options. We'll set up a simple topology, and I'll also show you what you can do eventually if you're going for CCNP or CCIE. So basically, for people who maybe have watched the videos on installing GNS3 and maybe couldn't get it done. And then towards the end, what we'll do is we'll go over some troubleshooting, and we'll go over loading up topologies that you find on the internet, getting those topologies to work for you. So first of all, what is it? It's very simple. It is an emulator that runs Cisco iOS images, not most, but some Cisco iOS images on your computer. And your computer could be Linux, it could be Windows, it could even be a Mac. So first of all, let me show you how it's going to look when you have GNS3 already up and running. So everything configured, everything 100%. So if you have GNS3 configured, it's really simple. You just click on it. Here we're doing it inside of Linux Mint 13. And I'm just going to load up a topology here. And we'll pick a Narvik topology. It's going to load in what's called a .NET file. .NET file has information about all these routers. So you can see there are 6 routers. Actually, there's 6, 9, 13 routers. These 4 devices right here, even though they're called switch 1, switch 2, switch 3, and switch 4, they're actually routers with switch cards built in. So they're kind of like a half router, half switch type thing. So this is a typical topology you will see in the CCIE, all the CCIE workbooks. Some slight differences between the workbooks, but for the most part, this is what you'll get. When you click play, all of these routers, virtual routers, are going to start up. And what GNS3 is doing, it is actually running a program called Dynamips. Dynamips is a hypervisor, and that's actually the thing that's running this iOS image and tricking it into thinking it's actually on a Cisco hardware. This GNS3 here is just a graphical interface, makes Dynamips look all pretty, gives you a couple more options. As everything is turned green, you'll see that basically it means all of your devices are started up. And then we click on this terminal window here, and that's going to open a telnet session or console session to all of these devices. Now in Linux Mint 13, we have a built-in terminal program. We've got all of these windows here. It's tabbed. It's really nice. And after a couple seconds, not a couple seconds, but about 30 seconds for this large of a topology, I'll be up and running, and I can start configuring with whatever workbook task that I'm on. And you can see everything's loading up. Router 1's already up. Now the ones with switches will take a little longer because they have an extra 16 ports that they have to look through. So I'll just show you what's up with router 1. If I show IP interface brief, you'll see that I already have IP addresses configured there. So that's the power of GNS3 in doing big topologies, everything already configured, so it gets you up and running very, very quickly. Yeah, that's when you have GNS3 all set up. And to shut it down, when you're all done with configuring, very easy. Just click this stop symbol, and we're out of there. So that's how GNS3 looks when you're all up and running, when everything's configured correctly. It's very fast if you have it on Linux. Can be very fast on Windows if you have everything configured correctly. And we'll talk about hardware requirements and all that stuff. Okay, so let's begin. So how the heck does this thing work? Well, as I said, GNS3 is a GUI for a program called Dynamips. And what Dynamips is doing, it's faking out your Intel or AMD processor and making it pretend to act like a MIPS processor which is the same processor in the Cisco architecture, in the Cisco routers. So now in the Cisco product line, there's all types of chips in there, but basically for these routers that it can emulate, it's going to fake them out. And then what you could do is, as long as you have enough memory, you can run a whole bunch of routers, switches, and connect them up. So whether it be fast Ethernet interface or serial interfaces, you can practice with frame relay and pretty much do everything 90% of what you need for CCIE certification. And the other 10%, there's switching stuff that you can't do with GNS3, and you'll just have to get real switches or rent a real rack or make yourself a real rack to get past that. So as far as layer 3 is concerned, we will have no problems with layer 3. You know, layer 3 routing protocols, IP addressing, that type of stuff, not a problem. It's just some of the layer 2 stuff. Multicast can get kind of crazy if you don't, or if you're not careful with your multicast pings, and also QoS. You won't get all the features of QoS as you will get on real gear, but 90-95% past that, GNS3 and Dynamips can do. Another thing that GNS3 can do, let me just fire it up again. Oops. So GNS3 can emulate several sets of different routers. Now in our particular meetup group, we only deal with the 3725. We just use one router because that's all you need. That one will get you all the way up to CCIE. It can also emulate a PIX or an ASA. It can also do Juniper routers. You could do a regular Ethernet switch, some ATM, some frame relay switches, and then recently they've added stuff like IDS, QEMU, so you could pop in something that looks like a PC, or you could go all out and pop in a virtual box machine. You can also run what's called a cloud, and what this cloud is, it lets you connect GNS3 out to your real gear, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Okay, so we have a question, how much RAM for each router and switch? So how much is recommended? Well, I'll show you that later, but usually what you can do is you can allocate starting from 128 megs. You could go even less, but 128 megs is what you probably want to start off with. And you can go all the way up to, well, you could go up to sky's the limit, but usually at the 256 meg mark, you'll be okay. So for that 12 router topology, 13 router topology, if you give each one 256 megs, math would say that you'll be looking at 3 gigs total. But there is an option that lessens that up. So there is an option, we might as well talk about it now. Under preferences, you'll see this option under Dynamips, enable Ghost iOS support and sparse memory support. What these two options do is that they lessen the amount of memory used. So if you start up 12 routers all with the same 3725 iOS, it's going to only really run that once. So it's kind of like ghosting PCs. If you have 10 ghosted PCs, you just need to have one DVD to fire them all up. This sparse memory support, this is pretty cool. It's going to start off with low memory, and as things happen on the router, as it needs more memory, it's going to dynamically add that in there. So it's not going to use 3 gigs right away. It might start off with 1.5 gigs and grow a little bit past that. But for hardware, we recommend that you pop as much RAM into your computer as possible. Anytime you're playing around with GNS3, I recommend that your desktop or laptop should have at least 8 gigs of RAM. Now it's not going to use all 8 gigs. Trust me, if you're doing just one router, you know, it's not going to use 8 gigs. But this is going to give you the breathing room so that you can run CCIE and CCNP topologies after that without a problem. And I think most computers these days come with 6 to 8 gigs of RAM, kind of as a default right now. So that shouldn't be a problem. If you have 16 gigs of RAM, you'll be running just fine without any problems. And while we're on the subject of hardware, get as much or get as fast of a processor as you can afford. These days it's Core i7 is pretty decent. Not a problem if you get a Core i7, Ivy Bridge, Sandy Bridge, that's fine. If you have a Core i5, that's okay as well, not a problem. Even a Core i3 is okay until you get really crazy topologies. Question from Matthew. Okay, maybe not. Okay, any questions about the Dynamips portion of it? Hopefully you should understand that Dynamips is actually the program that's running under GNS3, and GNS3 is just making it all pretty. Now what you could do is that, so we have a question, I can't see the screen anymore, is it just me? Do you have my icon clicked? Do you have someone else's icon clicked? Okay. So there are a group of people out there, all they do is they run Dynamips. So they don't actually run GNS3, they run Dynamips and do it that way. And these guys are command line only, and what you'll see is they've got GNS3 installed, or they probably just have Dynamips, and Dynamips is a program, let me just show you right here. All it is, it's this program right here, and this is actually the one that's running the iOS images, and so you can actually call this up from a command line, do different switches in there, different options to get this running. And for those of you who probably seen my troubleshooting video, the one where we're running like 30 routers and switches on rack space, that's the one that that we're using. We're popping Dynamips on rack space, and then we're calling it up on rack space directly. At least I think I uploaded that video, hopefully. Can't remember. It's been last year. Okay, the pieces required. This runs on pretty much any operating system. It runs on Windows, it runs on Linux, all types of flavors of Linux. It also runs on a Mac. Now, people on Windows 8, there's a lot of talk on the forums how they're having a little trouble with Windows 8. I personally have not run it on Windows 8, even though this laptop that I'm working on right now, it came with Windows 8, but practically on the first day I got it, I formatted the drive and put Windows 7 on it just because I hate Windows 8. Couple other things you're going to need. You're going to need Wireshark. You're going to need Dynamips. So GNS3 runs on top of Dynamips. And you'll need an iOS file. So an iOS image, 3725 is all you need. Now, looking at Wireshark and Dynamips, don't be scared, because thankfully the Windows installer of GNS3 includes these two programs. So by downloading the all-in-one installer, you get Wireshark and you get Dynamips. So you don't need to worry. For the Linux people, Linux is a little bit different. You have to separately install Wireshark and separately download Dynamips. You don't really install Dynamips, you just put it in a folder somewhere. But that's not a problem for the Linux guys. Not much else is required other than a decent laptop, decent desktop. Hopefully you have a machine that has a large screen. That way when you do the terminal windows, you have enough space to move your terminal windows around and also look at your topology. Okay, I think I explained about the hypervisors. So let's look at the chat room here. How many of you have already installed GNS3? You've already installed it. And of course, how many of you have not installed GNS3? Okay, we'll need to reinstall. Just got out of work. Okay, so basically all of you had no problems finding it and installing it. Okay, then that actually makes my... Oh, okay, so we had a question here. Yeah, a little comment. Alan says he had some problems finding the images. Images are not that hard to find as long as you do a Google search for 3725 iOS image. The only problem you may find is particular links may be virus infested. They may not work. They may have been taken down because Cisco kind of turns a blind eye to GNS3. They don't support it officially, but they don't actually want to kill it. So it's kind of in a limbo land. Now the iOS images officially, you have to, officially speaking, you have to have an actual Cisco router to be able, in the SmartNet contract, to download the image. But for now, Cisco is kind of, sort of letting that go. So as long as you can find a 3725 image, probably on a torrent site somewhere. If not a torrent site, probably on some Russian site. And if you're concerned about viruses, by all means, use VMware. Pop a Windows 7 image inside of VMware, download it that way, and scan it. So this one's going to be pretty easy because all of you have already installed it. We're going to spend the rest of the time going through the menu options that you may not have played with, and we'll also go through making your first topology. And also we're going to run through a little test thing. I'm going to have you download a topology from RouterGods, and we're going to get it to work. So if you can get that to work, you can get any topology from the internet to work on your GNS3. So let's fire up GNS3. Okay, so go ahead and start up your GNS3. And what you'll see here is when you first start up GNS3, I'm actually running the 8.4RC3, I think it is, the newest one, because we like to play with bleeding edge stuff. The stable release is 8.3.1, I believe. And you'll get this window here, this new project window. So I've always been telling people just cancel out of here and just do things manually. This new project window, what a project is, it's a combination of things. When you make a project, you're telling GNS3 that you want to save your configs, and you want to save your .NET file, and you want to possibly save everything in your flash to a specific location, and you're going to give it a name. So you might want to say, let's say, test project, and you can see that it fills in a directory for you. So in Linux, it's /home, RouterGods, GNS3 projects, test project. So it's going to chuck everything in there. And if I check this box, it's also going to save my NVRAM and flash. So what's the big deal about this? Well, if you have any VLANs, so where does VLAN.dat get saved? Well, you guessed it, it's in here. So if you make any VLANs, it's going to save the VLANs along with it. Here, this checkbox, save iOS startup configuration. So if you remember to save your config, WR or copy run start, it's going to save all of that into this project folder. Of course, you could open a project, you could click OK here, but for now I'm just going to click cancel. So let's expand that window out a little bit. So let's go through the different options up top. Nothing too much under File. Now this screenshot program is something I like using a lot. Screenshot, if you make your topology all nice and pretty and then you want to make a JPEG of it or a PNG of it, There you go, a screenshot is good. Usually where most people will go is to edit and preferences or iOS images or hypervisors. We'll actually get back there in a bit, but I want to show you what happens under view. View and docs. Now what you see is on the left hand side I've got my node types, so my routers, different types of routers, switches, all that stuff. Once I'm done with my topology, once I've set it up, I go ahead and kill that by going to view, docs, and node types. You could also just click this X right here. That's probably the fastest way. But to get it back, so let's see if I kill this, you're going, oh cool, oh I need to add a router again. Oh, how do I do it? We'll just go back up to view, docs, node types, and you'll get it back. Now there are other docs around, there are other menus. We've got Topology Summary, so I'm going to reset it back to how you get it when you first install GNS3. It looks so crappy, so cluttered. Okay, so this is how it looks when you first install it. Topology Summary captures. This will only really be useful for you if you have if you're going to be capturing packets with the Wireshark. Console and undo stack. So what I do, I just close out everything except this center window here. Well, you can't really close out this center window. Just gives me more space to work around with. Going to the right, these options right here, I almost never go to the control menu because all of these options are in this menu bar right here. So I usually don't need to go up to control. Then we go over one more to device. I don't actually have a device on, so that's not going to do anything. Annotate, we could add notes, basically do things to our topology, add pictures and stuff, draw rectangles and circles around things. You'll be doing that a lot when you play around with your routing protocols like BGP, OSPF, RIP, that type of stuff. Adding notes, you can write in IP addresses, write in AS numbers, write in all types of stuff. And help is just help. Okay, let's take a look at edit and preferences. Now most of the time you don't need to do anything too major in edit and preferences. There's only a couple things you need to mess around with. But we'll go through most of the options just so you know. So what I do when I install GNS3 in Linux, I make a GNS3 folder inside my user folder. So my user is called RouterGods. I pop a GNS3 folder in there and I make a projects folder under that. I do the same thing for images. So all my projects are in one spot. All my images, well, my one image is in another spot. Now in the old days of GNS3, you actually had to manually make these two folders. But now when you install the new GNS3 RC3, it's going to ask you if you want to make a projects folder and an image folder. It's going to make it for you automatically. So that's pretty darn cool. And so let me just show you how the projects folder works in my case. So GNS3, projects. I'm going to expand this window a bit. Okay. Usually I don't look at it this way, but since I'm doing this video broadcast, it probably makes it easier to see. Okay, so the way I have my projects organized is I have them by, this is for the CCNA guys, the beginner guys, this would be you. So if you click on that, we have different topologies. Topology 11, 5B is kind of like the most common one, NAT. As we click in, let's say I click in that one, The .cfgs, these are my configuration files for each router. It's already saved. We have a PNG file. This is the screenshot that I took of that topology. And then we have a .NET file. The .NET file is a configuration file that GNS3 loads that actually points to all these configuration files. It also points to the router image. So I have things pretty well organized. Got one for frame relay. Now for all the Narvik folks out there, this is how I have my stuff. I have it sorted out by workbook, so Foundation Volume 1, Foundation Volume 2. That's the first set that you would be studying for CCIE. Advanced Routing and Switching Volume 1, Volume 2, and Advanced Bootcamp Volume 2 somewhere. I guess I haven't made one for Volume 1 yet. As we go into these folders, you can see that I have it all sectioned out to the different labs here and the different pages of the workbook. So basically for me to start, I fire up GNS3, I find the particular thing. So, oh, I want to practice OSPF, that's on page 362. I click that, and what this .NET file is calling up, it's calling up OSPF, and it's going to take the configs from whatever folder that's specified in that .NET file. So probably something like that. And if we open these config files, they're just text files. And you can see that these are pretty familiar to you if you have any Cisco experience. Right, so they load right in. Now you can organize your projects folder however you want, but I'm just giving you ideas here. For the I&E folks, Internet Network Expert, Relativity Drive, Workbook 1, Workbook 2, and that's kind of how it looks. All of this is downloadable from the RouterGods website. Let's minimize that, get back to GNS3, and get back to preferences. Okay, the only thing you may want to change here is the delay between each device starting when you start all devices. If you have a fast computer, it is pretty safe to set this to 0, so it's going to slam all your devices on at one time. If you have somewhat slower computer, you may want to say take 2 seconds between starting everything up. Yeah, so Kenneth had his comment, I seriously need to reorganize my projects. Yeah, organization makes a whole lot of sense, especially if you're doing CCIE. So I'll give you an example. So this Narvik folder right here, I have everything organized and set up in there. What I can do is since this is VMware, I could just drag this out to my desktop to another computer. I could zip this up and upload it to someone. I could even give it to you. You'd be able to throw it into your projects folder, and with some modifications, you'd be able to run all of this just like I'm running it. So when you have everything organized, it makes quite a bit of sense. Some other people, what they do is they throw these into their Dropbox or what's the Microsoft one? SkyDrive, right? Microsoft SkyDrive or SugarSync, or there's a whole bunch of others, Google Drive, whatever, right? Whatever cloud program you want, and then you can access the same thing across all your different computers. So I always keep a copy of all of this on my SkyDrive just in case my laptop gets destroyed. Okay. So yeah, organization definitely makes a lot of sense for your GNS3 files, your projects. Okay, going back to edit and preferences. So yeah, delay between each device depends on your computer. If you're on a Core i7, 0 seconds or 1 second is just fine. Mute your mic, please. Thanks. Okay, going over to terminal settings. Usually if you install GNS3, you start up your devices and you click terminal. If your terminal windows come up, then you don't need to mess with this too much. The only time you really need to mess with this is if you're running Linux. You may have to select different consoles. If you're on KDE, you're going to select KDE. If you're on GNOME, you're select GNOME terminal, and you may select others. If you installed PuTTY and you're on Linux, and you want to use PuTTY, go ahead and click on that. No big deal. Here again, down here, you have a delay between each console, starting up. 0.5 seconds is what I have it set to. You may want to choose to set it to something different. This is an interesting option here. Close associated terminal program when deleting a node. So what this means is if you stop or you delete R2, then the terminal window connected to R2 will also close, which is pretty cool. Going over to GUI settings. This I usually don't change, except I always go to always use manual mode when adding links. So manual mode when adding links. This means that when you connect up your routers, the links will always say fast00 or fast01. So always have this checked. Always have that checked. Just saves you a lot of headache. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, on the new RC3, this may be checked by default, but I don't remember. Maybe some of you guys can verify that, but I'm thinking this is checked by default. Awesome. Really cool. Okay, before we go to the Dynamips one, any questions about the options in these three tabs, the GUI settings, general settings, or terminal settings? Okay, going to Dynamips. Now, where most people have problems is when they click on test settings here. This is really cool. When you click test settings, it will tell you if Dynamips starts or stops. Since Dynamips is the main thing that's running, if Dynamips doesn't start, you get this red message here saying it bombed out on you, then you shouldn't continue. You should troubleshoot why Dynamips is not starting. One of the main things that people mess up on is this executable path is wrong. So what you should do is click these three buttons and find wherever you popped a Dynamips. Some people like putting Dynamips inside of the GNS3 folder. That's usually what I do it for. In this case right here, as you can see, I popped it in the Dynamips folder. I made a Dynamips folder and threw it in there. But really, it's probably easier if you just throw it inside of the GNS3 folder, so it's easier to find. So if you get that path wrong, obviously Dynamips is not going to start. The working directory, this is where it puts your temp files. Usually it's GNS3/temp, that's fine. And everything else is normal. These three options should be checked: the enable Ghost iOS support, sparse memory, and this mmap. And what that does is it's going to lessen the memory load on your computer when you have big topologies open. These ports right here, these are the ports that Dynamips will use to open up your routers. So if you open up one router, it's going to take up 7200. If you're going to open up multiple routers, it's going to do 7201, 7202, 7203, and so on. This base console port, that's the port that it's going to open for Telnet, 2001, 2002, 2003, and so forth. For the Windows guys, you may have an error saying that you can't console into your routers, and that could be because log me in. Does anyone use log me in? Okay, no one uses log me in. It's fairly popular. Log me in, I believe, maybe someone can look it up for me. This 2001 port, that could be the port for log me in. I've seen basically a lot of forum posts saying that if you run log me in and GNS3 at the same time, GNS3 bombs out. Yeah, that's 7200. That's the hypervisor. Each port, basically you're going to have a hypervisor making ports to each particular router. So it's going to start at 7200 and go up. Yeah, so 2002. So router 1's going to start and then router 2 is going to bomb out. So what is a hypervisor? A hypervisor is actually the thing that's running your router images. It's faking out that image, making kind of like a little jail cell, pretending to be another processor, and it's running inside that jail cell. So Kurt, do you use VMware? Okay, VMware has a hypervisor. That hypervisor is faking out the machine, the Linux machine or the Windows machine that you're running inside. It's faking it out and making that OS think that it's running on its own computer. So the virtual machine thinks, oh, I've got RAM, I've got a hard drive, everything is fine. In our case here, this is the same way with Dynamips running its hypervisor and running a virtual Cisco router inside of that hypervisor. And the next tab, Hypervisor Manager. So usually I don't mess with this. What you may want to do is if you ever want to do a setup where the hypervisor is running on a different machine. Now, why would you run the hypervisor on a different machine? So let's say the machine you're on has a nice screen, 1920 by 1080, whatever, right? It's got a nice screen. You like the keyboard. It's got your nice mouse on it, but it's not that powerful. So when you run that CCIE lab, it just chugs, right? What you could do, if you're geek enough, is you can run the hypervisor, which is actually the brains of everything running. You could actually run this on a different machine, a more powerful machine. You'd still run GNS3 here on your local machine, and then what you would do is you would change the IP address to point to that hypervisor. There's a couple other places you'd have to mess with as well. So what you would do is your GNS3 here is just the pretty front end that's pulling all the data from your Uber machine that's doing all the number crunching. So it's kind of like how things basically work on the internet. Your iPad is just a display. The serious number crunching is going on Facebook's side, or I hate to mention we won't mention MySpace, but Facebook, Amazon, their servers are doing the heavy lifting. Your iPad is just a display that's pointing to an IP address. This is the same thing here. You can make a remote hypervisor so the heavy lifting is done on another machine. What I've seen people do is they will run the hypervisor on rack space, run GNS3 locally, and change the IP addresses, and then it will be as if it's running really well, but the heavy lifting's done on rack space. Okay, any questions about the Dynamips options here? All right, let's continue. These last three options are going to be quick. Capture, Wireshark, that's fine. After you do the capture, where's it going to chuck it? Throw it in temp. You may want to make a Wireshark folder for that, because this temp folder gets pretty ugly. And I don't really mess with that stuff too much. QEMU. So what this is you can download QEMU images. These are like mini computers, and very simple computers. They just ping and trace route. They're nothing too special. And you could, if you set this up right, then you can drag and drop a QEMU guest, so basically a computer, and connect them to your network. So basically to simulate end users. And I'll get to that question in a bit. Now, what's cool about QEMU is you could also emulate PICs, GNS, ASA, and IDS stuff. The most popular things today seem to be the ASA and the GNS. So you can download the Olive GNS image and actually run it inside of GNS3. So usually I don't mess with this too much because I just drag in a router, I dumb it out to make it look like a host, and go from there. VirtualBox. So if you also install VirtualBox on your computer, set this up correctly, you can have VirtualBox machines, drag them in, and connect them that way. Also behaving as end hosts or as servers. Okay, so Kurt has a question. So anyone would be able to telnet into those ports on my PC in the same LAN? Yes, correct. If you have your firewall open. And so I believe Paul does the big topologies, 30 plus router, crazy topologies, and then he will give a set of telnet, ports to get into. So you could say this guy telnet into ports 2000 to 2005. This guy telnet into ports, 2006 to 2010. And so all of you can be configuring a separate set of routers. So you could do some pretty crazy stuff with GNS3. Okay, so enough with all that. Let's make our first topology. Some of you have already done this, but we'll do it anyways. Drag in, if you have your 3725 image installed, drag in a 3700. Now, even though it's 3700, you're actually dragging in the 3725. If you're on the newest and greatest, the 84RC3, your menu option on the left looks slightly different. You actually have to click on the router symbol and click. There's a couple submenus after that, but it's the same concept. They've basically turned this left panel into just humongous Legoland icon forest. Yeah, so you can see it's the same concept. You click on the router and it's going to give you this menu here with the different routers. If you click on the PC looking thing, then you're going to get probably the QEMU guest and the VirtualBox. So they've just basically collapsed everything into there. It's kind of weird. They took the add a link option here. So on the old GNS3, it's at the top. Add link. If you look on Paul's screen, you can see they have add a link on the left hand side there. Whatever, right? I wonder if there's a way to get that back up to the top. Maybe there's a hidden button somewhere. Okay, so if you dragged in the 3700 and it's stuck without giving you an error, you are 90% on your way, because if you got an error, that means there's something wrong with your iOS image. Either you don't have one or you're not pointing to the right place. We get a lot of questions about that. We're also going to drag in another 3700, and you can see that we now have router 1 and router 2. And I'm just going to close out my node type screen just to give me more room. If you have a mouse with the wheel, you can use the scroll wheel to zoom in and zoom out. If you want to see the configuration of your router, just some basic stuff, you can hover your cursor over it. You'll see the router is stopped. Its Dynamips is running with 128 megs of RAM. I should change that default. Where the hypervisor is running on 7200, console's on 2001. And some other things. Now if we right click on the router, we get a bunch of options. How many of you have already configured your idle PC? Okay, cool. So you figured that one out. Yeah, that's one of the first things you do to make sure your CPU does not go crazy. Yeah, Jeremy will tell you that automatic idle PC is not 100%. So it's there if you want to play with it, and they'll get it locked down for the next one. So it'll be 100% hopefully on the next version. So Alan has a question, is the 3725 the one you recommend for all tasks? Yes, absolutely. 3725 all the way. And the reason for that, there's a couple reasons. It seems to be the most stable. It also seems to be the most common in the .NET files out there. So when you download a .NET file, and let's just find one. So we'll do Narvik this time. So let's say you go to internet, you download a .NET file, right? You go to GNS3 Vault or whatever, and you find one. Most likely, for their router images, you're going to see this image equals blah 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 C3725 whatever. If you have the same router image, you're in luck. You really don't need to change that much in this .NET file. If for some wacky reason you have a whatever 2800 or whatever, you're going to have to go into the .NET file, change it all, and also the topology is going to bomb out on you because maybe the serial interfaces don't match or the fast Ethernet interfaces don't match. So you're going to have a rough time getting that topology to work. Not impossible, but it just takes a little bit more time. If you have the same router image, 3725, it's going to make your life a lot easier because you just know that you just have to change a couple things in the .NET file and you're good. Let me just clean up my desktop a bit. Holy crap, I have too many things open. There we go. Okay, so router 1 and router 2. Now we're going to link them up, and if you're on the old GNS3, you're going to go up here, click on that icon. It kind of looks like the end of an Ethernet cable. If you're on the new GNS3, it's on the left-hand side. It looks similar, but it's big and fat. So just click on Add a Link. You'll see that your cursor turns into a plus symbol, and that link icon turns into a X, a red, it's kind of like a stop sign X. Click on R1, and it's going to ask you fast00 or fast01. And if you didn't get this, then you didn't follow my directions of clicking that manually connect interfaces. So how many of you are not getting this menu where it says fast00 and fast01? Okay, cool. So you're basically plugging in a cable into fast00, and now you can see your cursor wherever you drag it to, you're going to connect it. If you click on R2, you're given the same option. So we're going to do fast00. And so now they're connected. And make sure you go back up here, click on that stop symbol, just so you don't accidentally make another link, and you're good. Now you could even connect up the other ports. If you go back to this add a link, click back on R1, you can see the only port you have left is fast01. Click on that guy, go back to R2, fast01. So now you have dual links here. So you can practice with basic ether channel if you wanted to. Now you'll notice that these are blank right here, and that's because we don't have our interface labels checked. What we want to do is go up here to View and Show Interface Labels, if that's not already selected. So I always like to see my interface labels. So, you know, probably something like that. There you go. How many of you are seeing a big gray rectangle on your screen? Anyone else see that? That's kind of annoying. Hold on. Yeah, this is the problem. This is the problem with well, it's not. This is not Hangouts. This is Camtasia. When you do Camtasia and you're doing a screen capture video of VMware, this is what happens sometimes. Okay, no problem. It's not covering anything too important. Oh yeah. There you go. I just had to eraser it out. No. So it's not your fault. Okay, so if you put your cursor over the end of the interface, it's going to tell you what the link connects to. That's a pretty cool feature, especially when you're dealing with those 13 router topologies and it's just a mishmash of stuff. So let's start things up. We'll click on play. So this play button. Now if you click on play, it's going to fire up everything. If you want to start things up one at a time, you can right click and do start. But you know, I just fire everything up at once. When everything lights up green, you're good. And then you're going to go up here to this console to all devices. That's going to fire up a console to every one. Or you can do it one at a time by right clicking and console. But I do console to everyone. And then just go into each window, hit enter a couple times, and you're up and running. Right, so nothing too magical and crazy about that. The green dot represents the physical state. So what you'll see here is, well, it's the physical state according to GNS3. So if you go into router 1 and you show IP interface brief, you'll see that those links are actually shut down. So these green dots here in GNS3, that actually means that the router connecting to the link is on. Because as you can see by the terminal window, router 1, those interfaces are shut down. So it's a little bit different than if you've played around with Packet Tracer. In Packet Tracer, when you shut down a link, it turns red. If you turn it on, it turns green. It's a little bit different in GNS3. GNS3, the link, the dots turn green when the router turns on. And that's it. So I wouldn't worry. Once you have your console windows up, I don't even look at this anymore. And this is especially true for the CCIE guys because your layer 2 is going to be different from your layer 3. So this is going to be all different. It's going to confuse you if you look at this. All right, and here you could do stuff like normal, set up IP addresses, do all types of cool stuff. So let's set up one IP address. Interface fast00, IP address. Doesn't matter what you put the IP address. No shut. You know, something like that. And you want to save your config. So we actually have two things to worry about in GNS3. There's the topology and the configs. Yeah, right here it's just 2 routers. It's not a big deal. But once you get to like 4 routers, you kind of want to save your work because you don't want to be making this all the time. And especially if you add in drawings and stuff like that. So let's say you click on this circle icon, click on that, draw a big circle, right? This is your work of art. All right, you've got that. Click on this add a note, click somewhere. Bob was here. Click on here, click here. I don't know. Something like that. I don't know. Who knows, right? Random shit. So you spent all this time making this awesome topology and you don't want to remake it. So this topology is just the drawing here, the routers, the links. You want to save this. So go to File, Save Topology As, and just find a place to save it. So I'm just going to make a new folder for this guy. Meetup. Bad. Test. Test topology. Now, when you really get organized, I suggest you never call your things like test topology. What you want to do is, let's say if you were practicing with EIGRP, 2 routers. That way you can kind of remember how everything was. Because trust me, once you start getting a lot of .NET files and a lot of topologies in your folders, you're not going to remember anything. So we're going to save this. Now that's just a topology. That just gets you this wonderful, pretty setup here. Your configs are different. So to save your configs, your first order of business is to do a WR. This .NET file is not Microsoft.NET. What we're referring to in .NET is these files here. This is what GNS3 is using. These are opened by text, Notepad, Notepad++. They're regular text files, and they have nothing to do with Microsoft. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why Microsoft decided to use .NET. Well, I actually know why they used it, but it makes no sense. Okay, so first order of business, you actually copy run start or you do a WR. So you're going to virtually save your configs just like you would on a regular router. And I'll assume that we do it on router 2. So that's step 1. Then what you need to do is you need to extract them. So basically you're going to rip them out of your virtual router and throw them into the folder of that project that you set up. So go to that icon, import, export, startup configs, click on that and click to extract to a directory. And find that directory, which is test, and click OK. Now we can verify that it's stuck in there by going to that folder and test. And you can see here's my .NET and here's R1 and R2. Alright, so if I click on R1 and I scroll down, look at that. My config has saved in there. Let's close that out. Now here's something tricky though. If I open this .NET file, you'll see that my configuration for R1, now don't worry not a lot of this makes sense to you, but basically what this is, this XYZ coordinate stuff, this is telling you where that router icon is on the map. So the center of the picture is 0, and it's doing XYZ coordinates, up, down, left, right, all that good stuff. This fast00, fast01, that's telling the router who it's connected to and what port. Now you can see here that nowhere does it say where the configs are, where the commands are. And that's because we made this .NET file, we saved this .NET file before we saved the config file. And let me demonstrate for you. So just notice how it looks here. Let's close this out, go back to GNS3. Save your topology again, so go up to File, Save Topology As, and EIGRP to routers.net or whatever you called it. Save it again. It exists, that's fine. I'm going to overwrite it. Now let's go back to the folder and you're going to see some difference here. And hopefully. Okay, there we go. I'm going to make this larger. So now we have an extra line, CNFG, which stands for config, equals r1.cfg. So it's telling me that if you want the config for router 1, you're going to find it in the file called r1.cfg. So the order of operations kind of matters a bit. That's why save your configs first, then save your topology. So once again, save your configs first, then save your topology. You won't believe how many emails I get after the sessions. We do this humongous topology, and they went up here, they saved topology as, then they saved their configs, and they come back at the next meeting and they go, oh, I load up topology, but my configs aren't there. Well, that's what happened. They went up here, they did this first before exporting the configs out. It's kind of tricky, but okay. Any questions so far? Yes, you can set up the thing as a project, and there's a button to save configs automatically. Personally, I never do that. I do things the old-fashioned way. I just don't trust anything that's automagic. But, if it works for you, go ahead and use it. Okay, so closing things out gracefully. You never want to just hit this X right here because it's going to leave ports open, it's going to leave stuff in memory. So what you want to do is click on this stop button right there. It's going to gracefully shut down all of this stuff. Click on this, the close button. Actually, that does bring up a good question. You'll notice that if you go up to Edit and Preferences, there was an autosave option right here. Autosave every whatever seconds. I always have this set to 0. Always. So I don't want it to save my stuff. I save the stuff when I want it to save it. So this is kind of like in Microsoft Word and Microsoft Office, you could set up autosave every 60 seconds, every minute, every 30 seconds, or whatever. This does a similar function. I never use this. That's why I keep it at 0. Okay, so gracefully shutting off, click on that red button, then click X. And the cool thing about a graceful shutdown, if everything is done correctly, if you want to fire up GNS3 again, not a problem. You don't need to shut down and restart. Just go back to GNS3, click on it again, drag in another router, and hopefully we can click play and terminal into there, and we should be good. Now if you get an error the second time you try to start GNS3 and start up a router, what it means is GNS3 is lurking in the background and those ports haven't been released yet. So the 2000 port and the 7200 port, they are still there. The way you can find out if they're still running is if you're on Windows, you can run, what's that command? Netstat. There might be like a dash something after that, but if you run netstat, you can see what ports are open on your computer. Another good thing to run if you're on Windows, much better than netstat, light years ahead of netstat. There's a free utility out there. So right here I'm running on my RouterGods VM. Let's see if I can download it real quick. It's a sysinternals tool called TCP View. There you go, TCP View. It's free. The sysinternals guy is awesome. And let's just install this really quick. I don't really need to install it, but it's okay. So here's TCP View. As soon as you double click on it, these are the ports that are open. Yeah, it's a standalone executable, and it shows what ports are open on my computer. And this is like, you know, it's basically the same stuff as netstat, but columns, and it looks nice and stuff like that. TCP View. Okay, so we'll close this out gracefully. Any questions about making your own executable before we get into taking topologies from the internet and getting them to work for your computer? Okay, so we'll finish up with taking a topology from the internet and getting it to work on your PC, and then we'll also open it up to some miscellaneous questions if you have any. So if you go to the RouterGods page, under the RouterGods page we've got resources and GNS3 topologies. Speaking of which, while I'm looking at this screen, there won't be any classes, or I won't be doing any classes personally next week and the week after, because I will be at Narbic's 12-day boot camp. So I just plunked down the difference between the 5-day and the 12-day. I'm going to retake the first week, and then I'll be brand new for the second week, so that will be fun. So back to the topologies resources. GNS3 topologies, click on there, and you can see that I've got a whole bunch of topologies. So we're going to pick one randomly. Let's do topology 5B, 3 router triangle. Actually, no, that's just a PNG. Yeah, scratch that idea. Let's find something else. Okay, so topology 11, 7 routers. Let's do the one with the basic IP addresses. Now you can see the way I have it designed is for most of these there's a diagram. So that's the PNG file. So for those of you who just want to do this from scratch, just follow the diagram, drag the routers in, and type the stuff in. This is actually really good practice for those of you just starting out, because it gets you used to typing stuff. But once you get past that, then what you want to do is download the zipped file. So this has the .NET plus the configs. So click on zipped gns3.net and router configs. So you'll click on that, save it to wherever. So once you have downloaded it, just go to that folder. So downloads, there you go. So you're going to have a file topology11-basicip.zip. So what I do is I just unzip it. So extract here. And you're going to get a folder. And let's take a look at what's inside the folder. I added a couple instructions for you. Sometimes I don't have instructions, but luckily I put instructions here. And these instructions, these PNG files, they tell you exactly what to do. So you may have to change this. Actually, that's the next one, I think. There you go. Okay. So if you're having problems, if your Dynamips isn't working, if your working directory is different, if your iOS image is different, but we'll go over this. Yeah, the new website, that took a while. Okay, so the .NET file, or the zip file, contains the instructions, the configs for all of seven routers. So we can take a look at them. Router 1, it's all the IP addresses. Router 1's pretty simple. Router 2 probably has more crazy stuff. All the loopbacks and stuff like that. So it would have taken you forever to type all that in. And the .NET file. The .NET file is the brains of all of this. And if we click on that, you'll see that in this particular one, I've got a working directory called G something. Now, in Linux, there's no G drive. So what's going to happen is this possibly could bomb out. It may or may not, but we'll see later. This image file, this is where your C3725 image is pointing to. We're going to have to change that. We may have to change, we probably want to change our idle PC. And all of this other stuff should be good. So usually it's just the image and the idle PC that we have to mess with. So let's get out of here. We're going to take this folder. So go back up one, take that folder, you're going to cut it or copy, and you're going to throw it in your GNS3 projects folder. So you want to keep it all in one place. So projects, and I'm just going to dump it here. Paste. Okay. Now we're going to open up GNS3. This is where having a split screen can come in handy. So open up GNS3. Go up to Edit and iOS Images and Hypervisors. Now if you click on your image, whatever it is, you'll see that right here under image file, that is the full path of the image file. Now if you're in Linux, it's /home / whatever. If you're on Windows, it's going to be C:/ blah blah blah. All right. So this is the full path to your router image. If you have Notepad, you may want to copy that. So let's do this. Let's make our lives a little bit easier. So run a text editor. And don't worry if this seems kind of crazy. Eventually you'll get really, really good at it. So you're going to take that image file path. You're going to copy it into your Notepad. Yeah, I just like to do everything beforehand. This idle PC value, you're going to copy that. And if you want, you can go to Preferences and Dynamips. Your working directory here, that's your temp folder. And let's copy that. and you could close out GNS3. So you're going to copy three things: the path to your iOS, your idle PC, and this temp folder. You might get away with not copying the temp folder. I think it should still work if you don't do this. Okay. Now you're going to open up your .NET file, and you're basically going to do a simple find and replace. So here's my Topology 11 .NET file. I'm going to move this over here. Close this out. Close that. Oh, looks like in Linux, when I opened up that new notepad, new Kate, it nuked it. But okay, you kind of get the picture. Over here, I would have the notepad, and I would just look here over here. I would select that and replace it with the stuff in the other window. I would select idle PC, and I would replace it with the idle PC from the other window. And I would replace the working directory with the working directory from the other page. Now, one big thing to remember, in some of the larger topologies, there are multiple hypervisors, which means you have to replace this a couple times. So if I scroll down, you'll notice that this hypervisor down here also has similar information that I need to replace. I need to paste in the image path, I need to paste in the idle PC, and I need to paste in the working directory. So usually 2 times, maybe 3 times. For the configs, this is going to be the path to your folder. And the reason for this is now GNS3 likes to do relative configs, which means this. If we open up the Topology 11 page, you can see the .NETs here, and the R1, R2, R3, all that's there. Relative pathing means that your .NET file is looking for r1.cfg because they're in the same folder. It's direct. If for some reason R1 was in a folder beneath, you would have to add a / folder name to that. But usually we like to keep the .NET file and the CFG in the same spot. Okay. So the multiple hypervisors, this is going to be with, I'm going to show you the CCIE topologies. If we go to projects, relativity drive, and let's go at workbook 2, lab 8. I think this one has a multiple setup. Oh, go back. Lab 8. Yeah, so in this one we've got one hypervisor up here. This one hypervisor is running 1 router, 2 routers, 3 routers, 4, 5, 6. Looks like 6 or 7. And then we have another hypervisor down here. It's running the frame relay switch, which is doing overtime, switch 1, switch 2. So about 5 or 6 devices, no, about 4 or 5 devices. Then we have a third hypervisor. It's running a bunch of crap. And yeah, so we're getting away with 3 hypervisors here. If you're doing the troubleshooting topology, you're going to be doing 4 hypervisors, 5 hypervisors, something crazy. Theoretically, you can run everything in 1 hypervisor if you want. If you have the horsepower, that's fine. But a lot of people find that it's a little bit more stable and responsive if you run multiple hypervisors and you split your routers between them. But this is an advanced topic really only necessary for the CCIE guys. The CCNA guys, CCNP guys, don't need to worry about that stuff. Yep, later, Brandon. Okay, question and answer. We'll open it up if you have any questions. So some troubleshooting things that I have here. Did you make sure Dynamips was started up? That means you hit that test Dynamips button and you got that green text saying Dynamips started successfully. Do you have an iOS image? A lot of people, when they're eager to start, they're trying to fire up GNS3. They don't actually have an iOS image. Paths are incorrect. This is probably the number one thing. Paths are incorrect. And most likely you're going to run into this with, I like using Linux. I'll upload my .NET. All those paths are in Linux format and you're trying to do this in Windows. It's not a problem. Not a problem at all. You just have to change them. Do that copy paste. And if there's firewalls that are blocking ports. Yeah, definitely permissions. Now the permissions on Linux, the one that you need to worry about is the one for Dynamips, and I have a video about that. What people sometimes have, actually a lot, is they download Dynamips, but they leave the permissions at read-only or read-write, and you actually need to give this execute permissions. And it's really easy. You just right-click, Properties, go to Permissions, read-write, 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 and is executable. You could also do the chmod 777. I know some people just screamed, but just do that, and GNS3 will be able to run Dynamips. But yeah, permissions is definitely a big thing. Also, if you find that you may have downloaded the .NET file. If your permissions aren't at least read, then it's not going to work. So if we just take a look at this, read, write, read, write. Really, I think all you really need is read. Unless you're going to modify it, then you'll need write. But you should be okay there. Okay, questions. Go ahead, Kenneth. Okay, so Kenneth has a question. He's always installed GNS3 and it installs Dynamips for him. Any reason not to and do it the manual way that I am doing? Okay, so what you see here with me putting Dynamips in separately than GNS3, that's because I'm running it in Linux. So in Linux, when you download GNS3, it does not come with Dynamips. So you have to download Dynamips first and then download GNS3. So it's a two-step process. In Windows, when you download GNS3, you get the Windows all-in-one installer. So let's just go to GNS3. So download. So in Windows, this all-in-one installer includes Dynamips and all this other stuff. The Linux guys, we go with GZ or Zip or BZ, and this is just GNS3, and we have to download Dynamips here, right here, separately. So, it's just an extra thing. Yeah, now, if you go through the package, yeah, it's old. Let me demonstrate for you. Like a lot of people, they go to Software Manager or whatever they call it in the other ones, right? So let's take a look at what Software Manager will tell me. Wow, this is just bouncing up and down. Maybe I killed Software Manager. But yeah, it's going to be, I believe, if you go through the software update, they're all stuck at 7. Yeah, so that's like, dear God, that's old. Yeah, it looks like I may have my software update bombed out on me. Let's try that again. Usually it's pretty quick. Yeah, but I always install it manually. It's not that hard, and if you figure it out, you'll learn several skills along the way. That software manager, it's nice and everything if you're lazy, but someone who's really wants to learn Linux, that's you shouldn't really use that. Let me just take a look at the new Linux Mint. This is Linux Mint 14, I believe. Yeah, so here's the latest and greatest. Let's take a look. Software Manager. Okay, GNS3. And their version is, yeah, 7.4.1. That's like way back. So, yeah, manually install it. It's not that hard to manually install it. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? What other programs are out there? Programs that I can't talk about. There's Packet Tracer. That's Cisco Academy. It's pretty nice. It's a little bit limited, but it has some cool switching features. It's GUI based and all that. There is another program out there that we can't talk about that you're not supposed to have. So yes, there is another one out there, but I made a deal with the devil to not talk about it. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, and that devil was a Cisco lawyer, so we gotta keep them happy. All right, I'm gonna end this recording here.